Welcome to another episode of Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. We are your co-hosts. I'm Dr. Dave Peltz, and this is Dr. Joe Hamlett. How are you doing today, Doc?
Man, I am doing great. How are you doing, Doc? That's
I'm
kind of funny.
doing, yeah, I'm doing wonderful. Another blessed day to be here, and yeah, great time to share some more knowledge and experience with our listeners and watchers.
Absolutely, absolutely. I feel just the same. It's a great day, and I said it before. Any day that we're able to communicate and talk to somebody else, that means that we're still here, and which is a good day. So I concur. This is a good day.
Absolutely. Well, today we're going to talk about another subject. A lot of these subjects are near and dear to our hearts, and here's another one of those near and dear to our heart topics, and that's motivation. And a lot of folks kind of get, or sometimes get motivation and inspiration confused. And inspiration is more in the realm of influence versus motivation is more about the individual. And to break down motivation at a very, very high level, very simple way to understand it is there's basically two types of motivation. There's intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And those also subdivide into parts, but we won't get into those. So to understand the difference and the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, um, extrinsic motivation, think of it as a quid pro quo type scenario. There's you're either seeking a benefit or reward, or you're avoiding a benefit, a negative consequence. So we can say that external motivations would include monetary rewards, prestige, positions, promotions, physical tangible objects, cars, boats, homes. It could be a geographic location, that sort of thing. Intrinsic motivation is doing something for the love of doing it. Uh, Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your perspective, teaching. There's not a lot of prestige in it. Typically, there's not a lot of money in it, typically, but a lot of teachers, and ourselves included, have either teach or have taught for the love of teaching and transferring that knowledge and helping others. Other forms of intrinsic motivation may be hobbies, like I like to ride bicycles. There's really no monetary or extrinsic reward. You just do it for the love of doing it. Exercising, painting, DIY projects, cars, spending time with friends, maybe dining out for, you're a foodie or something like that. You do things for the love of doing them. So that's at a high level, the primary distinction between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. That being said, we're going to discuss how certain things that experiences that Joe and I have had have either been intrinsically or extrinsically motivated, or sometimes there is a duality to motivation. And the caveat is sometimes, I've heard arguments, well, everything is intrinsic and extrinsically motivated, and that's not necessarily true. Some things are, but most things can pretty much be either or. There are some categories where they do cross over. So, Joe, if you don't mind, I'll start out with an example for me,
Okay.
and that would be my doctoral program, for instance. So, and I'm going to back up even a little bit further with my college education. So at first I started going to school because there was extrinsic motivation. I wanted a promotion. I wanted to get out of the career I was in, get into a better career, have more financial opportunities, more career opportunities. So definite extrinsic motivation. I remember, and for those of you who have watched our podcast before, you'll recall that I've stated several times that I was not the best student in high school by any stretch of the word. So for the joy of going to school, probably not the case for me going to college because I enjoyed it. I didn't. I was afraid of it. I was terrified in some cases on some of the subjects. So I was going initially strictly from an extrinsic motivation perspective. Once I got into my bachelor's program and started doing well, I started becoming intrinsically motivated. Like, wow, I'm actually enjoying this. I'm doing well. It's making me feel good about myself. And that was kind of the theme that carried on through my master's program, because I went from my undergraduate to my graduate degree, carrying that same food of thought in my head, more promotions, more financial opportunities, more career opportunities. And hey, I kind of like this thing. I'm pretty good at it. So I took a break, took a 4-year sabbatical before I started my doctoral program. And that's where my attitude kind of changed a little bit towards it, because I knew that my career opportunities were going to be rather limited at that level of education. It's kind of a niche market, if you will. So what I found myself, where the drive was coming from, because it's a challenging set of coursework to go through. It's definitely time consuming. A lot of folks refer to it as an exercise in perseverance. Concur 100%. A
Right.
lot of hours, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. So what I found was, as I was going through my doctoral program, I really had to dig deep and really understand what's driving me to do it. And while there were the extrinsic motivators, definitely the prestige, the financial opportunities, the career opportunities, limited as they were, there was more reward to them. I started to realize that really what was driving me inside was just that, the inside, my core. I was doing it because I loved it. I was doing it because I enjoyed it. I was doing it because I wanted to be a good role model for my son and for my family and peers. So not quite a prestige, but more of a mentoring type perspective, to show others that it can be done, and that my desire to show and help other people was really driving me to show others that if I can do it, anybody can do it. So no reward there, just again, for the love of doing it, for the love of sharing with people. So that's where there's kind of a duality with some forms of education. And I would argue probably a lot of forms of education. There's typically a duality for it. Extrinsic motivation, jobs. I was always, when I was in the military, I realized that I could, when I applied myself, I could do well at things, and doing well at things got me recognized in a positive light. Conversely, if I was late for work, I was recognized in a negative way, and it's Airman Peltz or Sergeant Peltz, give me 50 or 100 push-ups. Not such a good thing. And so,
Right.
there's a negative consequence to being late for work. But on the other side, if I did something well, I was recognized for it or promoted for it. So that's a couple of examples of being intrinsically or extrinsically motivated. Another one I guess I can do real quick is DIY projects around the house. I like doing tile, making things, fixing things. I call it playing. My wife calls it maintenance, or fix that, or hey, can you do this? Can you make that? Sure. It's intrinsic motivation because I do it for the joy of doing it. So, Dr. Joe, can you think of any examples where you can share with our audience of intrinsic and or extrinsically motivated events or things that you've experienced in your life and career?
So very similar to you, Dave. The one that stands out, of course, is going to be the education piece, because, like you said, very similar to your situation. When I just even earned my associate's degree, there were motivators for me, and for me, the main one was progression in my career. At the time, I was at a point in my career where I wanted to do more. I wanted to be, in a leadership position, a supervisor or manager. And so for me, the reward, for returning to school, earning my associate's degree was potential, put me in a position for promotion. And so
And I'm going
that's
to
where,
interrupt, Joe. That is
yeah,
a great example of where education does not have a duality in motivation. You said it yourself that, I was in the military. In order to help get me promoted, I had to get my associate degree. And just from the few statements that you said, it wasn't like you were like, oh, I love going to school. I want to do this. Woo!
So you're right, that's how it started. But again, like you, much like you, my initial plan was just to finish my associate's degree, get me in a better position for promotion, and then, stop education,
Mhm.
to a degree. But that didn't happen. I realized how much I loved going to school, or how much I loved learning, not necessarily going to school, but learning, gathering new thoughts, new ways of thinking. That really appealed to me. So then it did become intrinsic, intrinsically, I'm just going to say internally
Intrinsically, yeah.
motivated,
Yeah,
internally
internally motivated.
motivated,
Yeah.
because yeah, um, my initial reason for going back to school definitely changed after, a couple of courses. The first couple of courses, now that was not the case. It was like, I got to do this to get this promotion, to get me in better position. But it really turned into, I really enjoy, education. And so for me, it just continued through my education journey with, continuing through my bachelor's, my master's, and then a doctorate, because it had me hooked, that
Mhm.
those motivators. But then it did become a duality, because, like I say, internally I became motivated, but then externally I started thinking. Then I started thinking of, like you said, the prestige, the maybe the rewards, and better job opportunities and other opportunities outside of just education, or you know jobs, but just the whole realm that I thought this was going to open up. So I really start to look at it as, potential rewards that I could gain, along with that prestige. So
Mhm.
it did become duality for me. And then it also turned into, and I'm going to say, you said inspiration and motivation are often, confused. And sometimes some of those inspirations turn into motivators as well.
Sure.
But going back to motivation, other factors, or external factors for me, became people didn't think I could do it.
Mm.
People, questioned me, why was I doing it, or they didn't think I could do it. And so that also became motivation for me to
The
prove them
status,
wrong.
the status of proving someone wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
And every time somebody said no, and again, it goes back to me earning my degree, gaining my education, to get in a position to move up in my career. I was still hearing no as I was applying for positions and not being selected. I was still hearing no. So in my mind at this time now, I'm thinking, the more education I get, the more I learn, the more I put on my resume, or, in my repertoire, then least chance of them saying no. And so for me, it almost became a competition with myself a little bit, and with those naysayers and those people that weren't allowing me to move forward. And
Mhm.
that's probably where I should have made the distinction, that it wasn't about me anymore. It was more about proving myself to others. And
Mhm.
that's, so you talk about, the joy of your, um, you enjoyed your doctoral program and all those things. It wasn't that way for me.
Mhm.
It became more of a labor, of love, so to speak,
Mhm.
because in a way I did enjoy the learning process, as far as, open my mind to all these possibilities. But at the same time, it became laborious, because I don't think I was doing it for the right reasons.
Mhm.
And even to to this day, if I think back, and I had different motivators, I probably wouldn't have finished it. Because again, I was so fueled by people, um, taking me for granted, people, believing that I didn't believe that I could do it, or people questioning why I was doing it. I think that was a bigger motivator for me than completing it for myself, because I enjoyed it, because I loved it, and all those things. It was a journey. I mean, and it's
Yeah.
really hard to explain it, but people that have been there will understand it. But it is, somebody told me at the very beginning of my doctoral program, it's going to be like you're a wife,
Mhm.
because you're going to have to dedicate so much of your life to that thing. and
Yeah.
and again, if you haven't been married or if you haven't gone through this process, it's a little difficult to understand. But it really did become that, because you know, you loved it some days, then other days you hated
Yeah.
it. And so for me, I didn't have the joy. But I also think back to my one of my motivators, like you said too, was the fact that I wanted to be a role model for my kids. I wanted to be a role model for other people around me. Um, I wasn't a great student. I started off a good student, but fell off, and so I had to get get through high school as best as I could. So
Hmm.
those things were there as well. Those were present for me as motivators too, to, like you said, help other people realize that they can achieve, you know, these goals like this. So it was a mixture. It really did become a duality of those internal, external forces, you know, for my motivation. But and you said this too, being an educator. I It's not as prestigious as we would think it should be. But I do it, and I still do it to this day. Educate people, because we say this all the time on this show. We want to help people take a shorter journey, you know, if that's
Hmm.
possible. We don't want them to take the long scenic route if they don't want to. I mean, it's great. Again, I won't discount my journey, but at the same time, if I would have had people, you know, feeding me um, bits and pieces that might help me along with my journey, I might have jumped on it, and no telling where I'd be today. But um, yeah, I know I'm an educator. I know that's part of my passion. And you mentioned bike riding. That's become a new passion for me. That's one of those things that I'm not running for, you know, getting prepared for any races or anything like that. For me, it's all that internal um, feeling of accomplishment, my own motivation for getting out there riding my bike so many miles. So that's not a duality for me. That's a pure joy.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's the thing with motivation. It may start in one place, or something may affect why you're motivated toward doing something. But like most things, there becomes a duality a lot of times. So it changes, and that's all part of that whole journey, that whole process of, you know, writing things down or setting those goals, but still being flexible enough to realize it's going to change, and then having that ability to change with it. Because like I said, if I would have strictly, you know, stayed with my original idea of going back to school, I might have stopped at my associate's degree.
Hmm.
But like you said, it, you know, after I learned that I enjoyed going to school or learning, then it changed for me. So
Hmm.
understanding that motivation can pull both sides. Again, those are
Yeah.
external, and turn, you know, maybe turn into an internal, or vice versa. So I think that's very important as well, that it turns into a duality, and
Yeah.
understanding that. And it's
Yeah.
okay. It
Yeah.
sometimes, in some ways, it may fuel you, you know, doubly in
Hmm.
some cases. So, and that's really what happened to me, because yeah, again, the journey, my journey, may not have been as pleasant, as far as, like Dave said, he enjoyed the process. I really did not enjoy it as much. I mean, I didn't. But at the same time, those the other side of the coin, or the motivation piece, I was still driven, because again, a lot of those external forces were pushing me, and so in my case, I needed that, because I don't think I would have had the motivation just myself to say I'm going to finish this. So
Right.
for me, it was a must to have both of those
Yeah.
forces
And,
against
and you
me.
and you brought up a good point that I want to touch on, and it can be a painful point for some folks, and it's not just at the doctoral level, but any really any task that you start, you sometimes you question yourself about whether I want to finish it, or I'm able to finish, or want to finish it, and I think that I know that people in their doctoral programs typically struggle with this. The cohort and the students that I knew when I was going and attending my doctoral program, I don't recall a single person that could honestly say that they did not have a moment of doubt.
Oh,
I
oh,
think it's
absolutely.
part of the process
Yep.
of persevering and enduring the exercise and learning and completion of a degree, especially a degree of that type. It's, you do question yourself, you do question your motivations, you do question your ability to complete and endure a project, a task or a process or a project like that. And that's part of, again, that critical self-reflection that we've talked about so many times.
Right.
It's really taking those moments or minutes or hours and really thinking hard with yourself and being honest with yourself. Is this something I still want to do, or still want to
Right.
do before it's too late? And I say too late because with a doctoral program, there tends to be some time constraints, meaning that you have to finish the coursework in a certain period of time, and then after that, your dissertation or your project that follows, you
Yep.
have to complete that in a certain time, or your licensure or your certification that follows post coursework. So they do give you time constraints. You don't have 25 years to complete your
Right.
dissertation.
Right.
It's typically, they allow 2 to 3 years for coursework, and then 2 to 3 years, 4 years for your publication in order to complete a project or get licensed. And then after
Right.
that, you're either done or you have to start over. And
Right.
it's an expensive investment. And I say that from a dollar perspective, from a time perspective, and from an energy perspective.
Oh,
To your point,
absolutely.
Joe, it being married, yeah, it's also can be correlated to having another job, another
Right.
full-time job, because I know when I was going to school for my bachelor's degree, it was, it started out as 30 hours a week, and I was able to get down to a really focused 12 hours per week. And that's not to brag, that's just to say, I was really kind of hyper focused on when I got in there. That's all I did. I
Right.
closed
Yeah.
my door and I just focused in and I did what I needed to do. And the same with my master's program. It was 20 to 30 hours a week to start, and I got down to about 12 hours a week,
Right.
sometimes 15. My doctoral program, that was like 40 to 60 hours a week, and I got it down to
Right.
about 30 to 40 hours a week. And that's really the thing to think about, is that time commitment. Do I have the stamina to do it? Life happens. I've talked to several colleagues that were going through a lot of personal turmoil and trials and tribulations, if you will, while they're in school, varying levels of education. And some of them had to pause, but a lot of them did return to complete it because there was something driving them, either externally or internally
And
driving them.
I was just gonna bring that back up. It just brings you right back to that same thing that, again, initially, your reason for going to school or doing whatever you're doing may change, and you
It
just said
may
it because of
change.
personal, things happening in your life, your job, or you just
Yeah.
can't do it anymore mentally or physically. So
Hmm.
you're right. And that's when people, like you said, some came back because there was that motivation for them to finish it, whether it was internal or external, but for whatever
Hmm.
reason they came back and were able to do it, where others, and like in my case, if I would have some really dramatic things happen to me along my journey, I may not have gone back. Like I said,
Hmm.
I didn't have the passion at the internal level, the internal motivation for me to complete it. So it did take those external, motivators for me. And so I
Hmm.
just imagine if one or two of those things went away, if things changed in my, my professional career, I may not have continued. So that is very important. The duality of that motivation, because if you rely just solely on one form or the other, it may be a little bit easier to step away or walk away.
Hmm.
But having both the duality of that motivation, I think that's very important. In my
Hmm.
case, I know it played a significant role in my ability to complete or finish. I just know that it for me it was both motivators were needed for me to complete mine. So I just wanted to jump in there because I knew that's where you're going, just
Hmm.
because um, having the same peers, same thing. Just if they're one motivation or singles stream of motivation was interrupted.
Mhm.
Yeah, not being able to pull from the other side. Yeah, I could see
Yeah.
that as being a really big impact on people.
Mhm. Yeah, and to kind of change the tone a little bit. So Joe and I focused on education. It's an easy example for us to utilize. But let's now
Right.
shift gears a little bit towards something that some of our viewers, maybe some of our viewers have have a terminal degree, some of them don't. So let's shift into a different kind of tone to where, maybe some we can kind of, you know, inspire, or create that relationship with other folks. And let's talk about like the professional environment for a few minutes. So for some of the jobs I've had, they've required certifications, and I typically did not come in with those certifications. So maybe it's a Six Sigma or Lean or Agile. Those are certifications that are out there. Maybe it's an HVAC or heating and ventilation, or maybe it's a different type of certification. Maybe it's a nursing certification, or maybe it's another type of certification, a learning certification, or a task certification for a job, soldering certification, or what have you. And for me, those certifications were not because I enjoyed learning. Some of those topics that they're like, hey, Dave, you need to, we're going to send you for, a day or a few hours, or you need to go online and complete this certification or go for a week for this certification. And I was just dreading it, not because it was like, oh, I have to learn again. I enjoy learning, but it just wasn't an area that I was like excited to learn about it. Maybe it
Right.
was just something I was just like, oh, geez, here we go again. Here's another flavor of the month certification. Go spend 20 minutes or 2 hours or 8 hours of my life that I'll never get back. I've got other things I need to get done today for work, and not now I don't have that time because they're sending me off to do this stuff. So, um, for things like that, definitely extrinsically motivated. No internal drive, no like, oh, I'm going to do this because I
Right.
love to, give me 12 more of those, please. It's like, no, it's like something like, oh, here, I got to do something else that's pulling me away from my regular job,
Right. Yeah.
and I still have to complete that other task in time, just with less available hours to it. So there are definitely examples of requirements through our jobs or careers that we have to obtain or maintain as a part of our job that we may not enjoy doing. But there again, the extrinsic motivation, the quid pro quo of it is, hey, you do it, you get to keep your job and we'll give you more work and it'll help advance your career, versus
Right.
if you don't, you're either going to get left behind or laid off, or you're at the bottom of the list for, well, Dave isn't really motivated to stay with the company or in his job because he didn't do these three things that we asked him to do or told him to do. So maybe he's not really a team player, or maybe he just stays down here. So there's that sort of scenario as well. um,
No, and you're absolutely correct, Dave. So, like you said, I've been in positions where that was brought up, that a certain certification, and really what it equated to was that you were going to gain more responsibility. You're going to be viewed as a team player in those things, and like you, it doesn't have the motivation, or it doesn't come to you as motivation that you want to do this for your own personal reasons. So for me, that was difficult. And in the case I was expected to get a certain certification in quality, and I didn't. It even went as far as the company paying for everything. And I still just didn't have the motivation, or it just wasn't in my eyes
the
rewarding enough for
desire,
me
it
to,
just wasn't there.
to do it. So I didn't. And so, and maybe it did hurt my career, but at the time it didn't matter to me,
Mhm.
because that was their idea of,
Mhm.
again, we talked about success before. That was their level of success, and I just didn't buy into it. And
Mhm.
so, I also not necessarily became arrogant, but I just kept thinking to myself, how many more things am I going to have to do or to prove to you,
Mhm.
that I am worthy of
Yeah.
this position, or being selected for the next thing, versus this certification that you want me to get. So
Mhm.
for me, it became that personal because now, at that time I had gotten over the fact that I needed to prove myself and to gain another title or another accolade for people to recognize me. Now I was at that point where I was like, you know what, I've done a lot of things, and if my resume or my skills that I bring to the table are not enough, then maybe this is not the opportunity for me. And
Yeah.
so it really, you hit it on the head. If it's not that motivator that you're seeking, or it doesn't align with where you are, where you want to go, then it doesn't have as much of an importance, or
Yeah.
it's not going to create that factor that's going to make you jump up and down and say, hey, I want to do this. And that's what it was for me. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and sometimes it's just part of change management. You're migrating from one system to another, or you
Right,
you you
right,
know you're learning the latest updates for Microsoft Office, or
right,
Google products, or what have you. And it's just an is what it is. It's not that you dislike learning a new learning management
right,
system. It's just, hey, we're transitioning from ABC to 1, 2, 3, and it's part of your job. It's just a job requirement. Or, we can even, going away from the learning or training aspect, we can go to just the regular job aspect, the tasking involved. We all have, you know, let's say 10 tasks that we're primarily responsible for in our job, and maybe 6 of them we just love to do. We enjoy doing it. I like doing data analytics. I enjoy doing it. I get in there and I just, have my headphones on and get my zone, listen to my music, and it's just, I knock it out and it's like, yeah, that's fun. And I know
right.
data analytics is not one of those exciting career fields.
For everybody.
It's a
Right,
different type
right,
of animal, if you will, that enjoys doing that. But it's just, that's the part of your job that you like. There's a little intrinsic motivation, but the extrinsic motivation is, hey, you're producing a good product for your boss and they like it and they recognize you for it, formally or informally. The other side of it is, now I've got those still 4 remaining tasks, like sending emails, making follow-up calls that I may not necessarily enjoy, or writing the policies to go with, whatever. Or maybe it's, producing so many widgets or products each day. And maybe that's not the part you enjoy so much, but it's part of your job and you have to do it. So it's
right,
just part of
right,
the job. It's part of the job requirements. It's not there for you to like or dislike. It's just, to keep your job, you have to do the assigned tasks. And if you don't do those assigned tasks, there may be some negative consequences, or maybe there won't. Maybe it's just and is what it is. So, in the last few minutes that we have, is there anything else that you'd like to touch on, Joe, or mention, or bring up regarding motivation?
No, I think we covered a lot of the base. For me, the biggest thing for motivation is duality of it. Like I
Mm,
say, you may start in one place on the spectrum, whether it's internal or external motivators. For me, it became the duality, and I think for a lot of people, it does become the duality, because if not, you mentioned it like in the doctoral program, if that's the only driver for you, the only motivator you have, and say it is internal, then it may be easier to walk away from it if you don't have the other side of it, that may show you some rewards for doing it or things
or
like
vice
that,
versa.
or
Maybe to
vice.
your
Yeah,
to your
exactly.
point, let's say you enjoy painting so much that you decide, well, I'm going to make a go of this and see if I can do a business. And then your joy turns into a labor of love,
Right.
which turns into a labor of
Absolutely.
frustration, and
Yeah.
you no
Yeah.
longer enjoy doing that which you did before, because now you
Right.
have to do it
Yeah.
versus
It's so, yeah.
wanting to
So
do it, and
that's a
vice
great
versa.
example. Yeah, that's a great
And
example.
sometimes you find something that's like, well, I have to do this or I'll lose my job. And then you
Right.
realize, hey, I actually enjoy supervising and managing and coaching. And I'd
Right.
never thought about being a trainer, but wow, I really enjoy training and teaching new employees how to do their job better. So there is that duality, definitely. But to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, really, and you'd mentioned it earlier on, really, it's that reflection piece. It's really getting
Right. Yeah.
into doing those temperature checks with yourself, checking in with yourself and saying, hey, where am I at? Am I still good? Or do I need to work on myself a little bit, or alter my focus, or reevaluate my focus, or what's driving me to do this? And
Absolutely, because you know, an example you talked about with certifications. For me, that's where it was for me. That's why I chose at that point. I chose not to do it because it did not fit it did not fit my goals or where I wanted to go, where I wanted, you know, where I was at that point and where I was trying to go. So
mm,
that's another good point, that taking that critical self-reflection, that time to do that. And for me, it wasn't worth the you know, sweating and tears to do that. So I chose not to. So though that again, motivation, it's could come full circle. Like I say, you could be in the duality realm of motivation, or like you said, it could go from a positive thing to a negative thing, or from a negative thing to a positive thing. So
mm,
just understanding that both sides of the coin could matter in some cases, and other cases it may not. So just understanding, being open to that you may have to redirect, like we talked about before, redirect, change where you're headed, or make sure it still aligns. I think
yeah,
that's the biggest piece with motivation, because what may have started off your drive, like in my case, you know, I was looking for the reward and things like that, and it did turn into more of a internal and more passion and things like that. So just being aware of that, and if you need to reflect, sit back and take a step back and look at the whole picture, then that might help you determine what side of the motivation coin that you're, you know, you're on, or it may help you align to the other side. So
yeah,
for me, that's about it. I mean, again, um, motive people use motivation for different things. So it really comes down to that individual again. Most of these things we talk about is individually driven. So you focusing on what your needs are and where you're trying to go. I mean, it's
yeah,
still it is very important.
yeah. All right, so that's our time for this episode. So we're going to go ahead and let you all get back to doing what you were doing prior to our podcast. And thank you for joining us, viewers and listeners. And until next time, keep on being your